श्रियं सरस्वतीं गौरीं गणेशं स्कन्दमीश्वरं ब्रह्माणं वह्निमिन्द्रादीन् वासुदेवं नमाम्यहम्.
Several important bills were passed during the year. Let's take a look at major bills passed during the budget, monsoon and winter sessions of Parliament and analyze them with our illustrious panel of guests. Joining us on the program today, Mr. Rakesh Sinha, Member Parliament, Rajya Sabha. He represents the BJP. Also joining us, Mr. Chakshu, Head of Outreach, PRS. We also have with us Dr. Vageshwari Deswal, Professor, Faculty of Law, Delhi University. And joining us through virtual platform, Mr. Vikas Singh, Senior Advocate, Supreme Court of India. We also have with us young and vibrant audience. And let's begin the program with the parliamentarian on our panel today. Mr. Sinha, coming to you first. Let's break the bills session by session and talking about the budget session. Of course, it was about the financial agenda of the government, the appropriation bills, the Jammu Kashmir appropriation bill. But one very important bill that was moved by the Ministry of Home Affairs was about criminal identification procedure bill. Now, sir, 7.5 lakh cases in India are closed every year due to lack of evidence. With the passage of this bill, there are hopes that we'll see that the organized crime would be hit. And also, the second concern that is being raised is the misuse of data. How do you see the impact of this bill?
You know, the nature and content of crime and the criminals have changed, but the law remained the same. Therefore, in the ambit of the previous law, it was difficult to catch the criminals and bring the substantive proof against them. Therefore, trial took a longer time and many criminals got exempted due to lack of substantive evidences. Therefore, this amendment has been a very significant because it expanded the horizon of the law. One, that investigator can collect the information from the criminal or the concerned people. This right has been given and it has been delegated in a hierarchical manner. Second important thing is that the evidences collected can be destroyed if the criminal is acquitted, accused is acquitted. So this has a balancing act. If you don't have the evidences against the criminals, if you cannot collect in a very free and impartial manner, it is difficult to prove the case in the court because the criminals have many ways to get exempted. In a democratic society, in a liberal democracy, every criminal gets the support of the lawyers. He has support of the part of the civil society. Therefore, the contest between the court between the state and the criminal is very difficult condition. And in that situation, the state needs a very unambiguous law with clear-cut definition of the collection of the information, recording of the information, storage of the information. These were lacking. They were lacking because in those years, such difficulties were not present before the state. Now, a state is facing a different kind of situation, different kind of criminal activities, and different kind of criminals. Therefore, I think this law is very important, very significant. But one thing I want to add, Kriti, here, that nature of the Indian Parliament is changing.
Yes.
That is very significant. Our young viewers must know that. In the last session, we discussed the Agar Wood. Nobody knew. I mean, I was not knowing. I prepared that. Agar Wood was a private member resolution by former Chief Minister of Tripura,
Yes,
Biplav Dev. That Agar Wood, the cost is 5 lakh per kilo. That Agar Wood is discussed. Now the people in tribal in Tripura who have possessed the Agar Wood and that tree, now they are feeling that the Indian Republic and the Republic belongs to the Indian Parliament is not coming to their door. This is the beauty of the new democracy, new liberal democracy in India.
Of course, we also remember your riveting speech that day. But moving on and talking about the monsoon session, Mr. Roy, from diplomacy, from the angle of India's international commitments, two important bills, the India-Antarctic Bill and weapons of mass destruction, the delivery, prohibition of unlawful activities, and allow me to borrow one bill from the winter session, which was anti-maritime piracy. How do you see the impact of these bills?
Kriti, very often we forget that our parliament is not only a lawmaking institution with regard to gaps in our legislative process, but we as a nation also have international commitments. So, for example, if India signs a treaty at the United Nations and the treaty casts an obligation on us as a country to make a law, then the Parliament of India steps in and has to make a law not ratifying, but making a law under that treaty. Now, the three bills that you talked about, the first one is the Antarctic Bill, the Weapons of Mass Destruction, and the Anti-Piracy Bill. All three of them relate to India's international obligations. Let's take the anti-piracy bill. What it does is, till now, in the absence of a statutory law, if our authorities, our Navy, our Coast Guard, they apprehended pirates, there was no way to prosecute them. This law will now make it easier for authorities to combat piracy in the Indian waters. The second is the Weapons of Mass Destruction Amendment. We've already signed a treaty, we've passed a bill related to it, and what this amendment was doing was that it was making the financing of chemical weapons or weapons of mass destruction, it was penalizing that. Finally, the Antarctic Bill. Again, two treaties that we've signed at the United Nations. And what this bill is doing is it's preparing a regulatory environment. So if an expedition from India has to go to Antarctica, what are the procedures that expedition will have to follow? What are the clearances that will require? What are the things it can do or cannot do? How will it dispose of its waste? Now, the monsoon session, as you also pointed out in your opening remarks, was perhaps one of the most contentious sessions in the entire year. There was a number of disruptions. But there was one bill that our young audience might appreciate that was also passed. It was the anti-doping bill.
That's true.
Now, what it did is that it gave, till now, the society that ensured that there was no doping in sports at the national and the international level, it did not have recognition under law. So what this bill did was it gave it statutory recognition and brought it up to international standards.
But Dr. Deswal, let's talk about the winter session. As Mr. Sinha said, it was all about climate. It was all about sustainability efforts of India. Another important aspect, of course, was empowering our tribes. But look at the Wildlife Amendment Bill. Look at the Energy Conservation Bill. How do you look at the winter session of Parliament 2022?
This was a very fruitful session in terms of specifically these two bills, which finally got to see the light of the day. Because these two bills, they are indicative of India's commitment towards conservation of environment. Whether we are talking about conservation of our wildlife, whether we are talking about conservation of our energy requirements. See, this Energy Conservation Bill, this talks about conserving not only the energy, but conservation of our environment as a whole, because it marks a paradigm shift. That is, we are to use more renewable sources of energy. As you just remarked, that the emphasis was on sustainability. That is, we need to check the indiscriminate usage of our resources so that we can at least preserve and conserve our resources for our generations to come. So while we are encouraging the usage of greener fuels such as green ammonia, ethanol, and other renewable sources of energy, we are planning to institute a carbon credit mechanism wherein if wherever there are those industries or even residential or commercial buildings which are using a large amount of energy, so they are encouraged to use renewable sources of energy, and at the same time this carbon credit mechanism will ensure that if they overachieve the credits, then they get some benefits, and if they underachieve, then either they'll have to purchase certain carbon credits or they will be penalized for the same. So in a way, these are all indicative of India's commitment towards conservation of our environment. And in the same vein, when we talk about the Wildlife Conservation Bill, See, what it says that even otherwise, see, India has an obligation under CITES, which is
That's right.
Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Flora as well as Fauna.
Yeah.
So whether we are talking about import of invasive species of flora and fauna, so that needs to be checked. When we talk about trade in endangered species, that needs to be checked. And
Yes.
there is one particular contentious point regarding this bill, and that was the permission that was given to employ elephants in religious and other purposes.
Right.
So there were people who had certain objections. But see, the good part is that till now it was not regulated, the usage of these animals. So if we are now going to employ them, whether that is for the purposes of religious processions, at least now there is a regulation in place
Right.
by which we can ensure that their health, their safety, it can be taken care of, and we can minimize the conflict between humans and animals.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So very important
Yes.
point. On that note, let's also get in Mr. Vikas Singh in the discussion. Sir, in 2022, we saw members cutting across party lines voice concern over pendency of cases in India with several parliamentary tools. Now, the CJI has said courts in the country should ensure that the judicial clock moves ahead at least 10 years. So, your thoughts on 2022 and hopes for 2023?
Under Article 145 of the Constitution, the Supreme Court has got the power to make rules, but those rules are subject to any law made by Parliament.
That's true.
And one of the clauses for that law-making power under 145 is with regard to procedure for hearing and for deciding of matters within time. Now, till date, Parliament has not had the time to look into make any law. Secondly, if they were to provide for a rule, there could definitely be a method by which they could try to ensure that matters are not kept pending for long. Now, if you see, unlike 145 under 118, the Parliament has got the power to make rules for conduct of its business. Now, for enactment of a law, 16 editions of the Lok Sabha have been made with regard to making rules for business. Till date, there is no method in the rule for making it compulsory for stakeholder consultation as to whether a law should be made or should not be made, and if it should be made, whether the kind of changes should be there or not there. And these are areas where they must look into and ensure that whenever they make a law which deals with people, which deals with issues concerning experts, which deals with environment, which deals with forest, there are stakeholders in every such field who are consulted before any law is made. And you'll have to appreciate this, that in a democracy, the vote is only taken once. So the voter has only a right to decide once whom to vote, whom not to vote. But in those 5 years, and this vote works for 5 years. But in these 5 years, there is so much of diverse activity that the country has to perform, and especially a growing country like India, which is now galloping towards being the world leader, that there is so much of diversity to be contained, especially in a country like India, which has so many languages and so many religions and so many dialects, that to encompass all that diversity into its lawmaking is something which it should do first before it brings out a law which will be effective for the entire country. So I think these are areas where, and as far as pendency is concerned, the problem is not with regard to the functioning of the judiciary. If you were to go by the disposal of cases in India, per judge disposal, it is amongst the highest in the world. So it is not that our judges are not performing. It's only that there has been a decline in the standard or the quality of judges. If that were to improve, that will definitely go a very long way in improving the pendency. And secondly, the government and the parliament needs to look into judicial infrastructure, whereas an infrastructure for a district magistrate will come overnight. An infrastructure for a district judge will take years. If a district magistrate will have 3 cars at his home, there will be, when he requires only one, a district judge will be sharing his car with a couple of other judges. So that's the kind of imbalance that is there in our system. And even the appointments at the lower judiciary, higher judiciary, at all stages is languishing. And the vacancies are not being, filled up, or vacancies are not being identified considering the population that we have in this country. The judge to population ratio is very, very poor in this country as compared to most of the Western world. And from the judiciary side, I will definitely say that, it is not that they are not functioning, but it is definitely there is scope for improvement.
Mr. Sinha, I'll give you the chance to refute all those charges and probably allay his concerns.
You know, the common man, it does not require any expert, feel and encounter the role of judiciary. It has a very positive, constructive and impartial role. Nobody can dispute that. The point of dispute is two. One, that when there are thousands and lakhs of pending cases, the question has been raised, why the vacation in the judiciary? A judge can take the vacation for 15 days, 20 days, 1 month, 2 months. So it is not a university and colleges that you are 2 months closure of the colleges. So when there are thousands of cases in the given infrastructure, in the given realities, you have to change the realities. The credit is in changing the reality, credit is not in fighting the realities. So number one, the vacation, they should grow. They should ask by evolving themselves, then there should be no vacation. And there should be other modus operandi for that, number one. Number two, the kind of disposal of the cases, it depends on the people related to law. But as far as I know, the disposal is very slow. The accused or someone, the cases come, in a second they say next date. Why? Why next date? Means in a one case, people get 20 times next date. Lawyers get the fee. Court shows the court is functioning, but the people are sufferers. So you have to see how much you can mitigate the suffering of the people, number one. Number two, that judiciary they have two aspects. One, when it opposed the Jamindari abolition bill earlier, and it was found as a conservative judiciary in 1950s. Later on, it became overactive. So judiciary should not have been overactive. It should not be contempt with the legislation. Parliament is supreme. If we are making law, you should not make a public statement against, against the lawmakers, against the executive. You have your own business, and we respect independent and impartial judiciary is the core of democracy. Without independent and impartial judiciary, democracy can't exist. Right. But at the same time, legislature, we get mandate from the people to change the law. We get the mandate for development. Every step, if you are coming as you become the legislature and executive, then democracy cannot function.
Absolutely, Mr. Sinha. Let's leave this topic for discussion on another day. Let's also take a recap on 2022 and take some questions from our audience here.
My question is regarding the recent changes made in the Wildlife Protection Act 2022. My question is, isn't there a potential conflict with the Forest Rights Act, under which the tribes' rights are defined?
I think Professor Saab would be much better person to answer that. My only small observation to your question was the way Parliament makes laws is that the legal department of the Government of India would compare laws to check if there is a potential conflict. The law will then go to the cabinet, where the cabinet will get a detailed note about why that amendment is necessary. And only after that process will it come to Parliament for scrutiny and deliberation. And in case, if you're pointing out, if assuming for the sake of argument that there could be a conflict, then the judiciary will step in to ensure that it makes it clear as to what is the realm of each law. The two laws also have a proviso which says that in case of any difficulties, the government can make rules to take care of those difficulties. But I'll defer to...
The spirit of the question is that tribals' rights must be protected and preserved. Any amendment should not disturb, unset their own existence. That is the core of the question. And I am addressing. For the last 70 years, tribals were just like the objects. When there were development, they have been displaced without giving the compensation or amount of compensation was very low. They lacked the voice. They had one voice, that Naxal voice, that is using the violence. Other democratic forces have not worked. This government, after 2014, has given the primacy to the tribals' right.
Yeah.
Therefore, the conflict between the revenue department and the tribal department and the forest department, their land dispute, and the land was given to the third party. These things are now being controlled by the acts. Now,
Right.
tribals' rights, tribals' existence, tribals' property, their right, Jal, Jameen, Jangal, is a natural right. No constitution can destroy that. And having considered that, having assumed that we are protecting their rights, then we are making any amendment. No amendment can harm the tribal of the country.
Dr. Deswal, I just have 2 minutes. I'd like to take another question.
Oh, so in fact, just to add to what Mr. Sinha just said, in fact, this bill has a distinct feature which is talking about protecting the rights of indigenous people who are staying within those forest reserves. Now, they are the ones who will have exclusive rights to the water and the woods and all other things that are available in that. Obviously, with a restriction that the indiscriminate exploitation of those resources that needs to be checked, but they have an exclusive right to use all these resources. So in fact, this is a very well thought of amendment, and I mean, all these doubts and fears, they are absolutely baseless that this is going to be conflicting with the rights of tribes.
Right. Let's take last 2 questions together. Please go ahead.
Hello, my name is Ashmita, and my question is related to the Criminal Procedure Act. That it is said that innocent until proven guilty. So, what about all that data which will be collected before the person is proven guilty? Who will ensure that the data is deleted if that he or she gets proven innocent? And what about the mental trauma that person will go through?
When data is collected, even the law-making agency or the law enforcing agency don't know who are the criminals. So some assumptions, some initial facts they work. When data is collected and a record is kept preserved, after you get acquitted, then on your request that would be destroyed. That is the part of the law. So there is no confusion, no ambiguity in the law. We have discussed in the parliament, and any confusion which has been raised or suspicion raised, we have resolved. The government has resolved. One thing I mentioned,
Yes,
because the forest is there, this government, Prime Minister has emphasized that there should be paperless business in the legislative. We have lakhs of questions, papers, and reports. So we are saving, after in every 1 ton paper saving, we are saving 24 trees. So you see the vision of the Prime Minister that now 24 states in the country out of 31 completely paperless. Now Parliament is also going to be paperless. These are the positive constructive measures which will remain unnoticed or unattended. So we are doing all these things, and credit goes to our Prime Minister for such vision, which is giving a constructive approach to the nation's development.
Last question, please.
In Wildlife Protection Amendment Act 2022, Section 43, which states that there is a permit for the use of elephant for the religious and any other purpose. Do you think this is a vague, the phrase which enables the any other purpose create a greater chance
Dr.
for the
Deswal,
illegal?
do we need more clarity?
I think I've already answered this question, but any other purpose, see, absolutely, as Mr. Chakshu had also clarified, that in case there'll be any confusion, in case there'll be any unconstitutional interpretation of the law, we have our courts to strike that down.
Right. I'm absolutely out of time. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Deswal, Mr. Sinha, and Mr. Roy. Well, viewers, that's all we had for you in this edition. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned to Sunset TV. Goodbye from my side for now.
Shriyam Saraswatim Gaurim Ganesham Skandamishwaram Brahmanam Vahanimindradi Vasudevam Namamyaham.